On a humid evening in Manila, where jeepneys rattled through crowded streets and the air smelled of roasted corn, gasoline, and damp concrete, a 15-year-old boy named Mateo stood barefoot outside a massive building that looked too grand for someone like him, clutching a battered old guitar with missing strings and a cracked body. The last and only gift from his father, who had died years ago in a construction accident that left his family broken and poor, yet filled Mateo with a determination that burned even brighter with every struggle he endured. His father had been no famous musician, just a man who sang Hotel California softly by candlelight during blackouts in their tin roof shack, his voice tender and full of love, and those moments became Mateo's most treasured memories, the lullabies that carried him through hunger and loss, the soundtrack of a childhood cut short by grief. And though Mateo did not fully understand the lyrics then, he understood the emotion. The yearning, the bittersweet hope, and when his father's life was cut short, Mateo promised himself he would one day sing that song not just for himself but for the world, carrying his father's voice through his own. His mother, a laundress who worked endless hours scrubbing clothes until her hands cracked and bled, encouraged him every night despite her exhaustion, whispering, "Your voice will be our wings, hijo. Never let anyone take that from you," and even when neighbors mocked, saying, "Dreams were for the rich," that no barefoot boy from the slums could ever be more than a street performer begging for coins, she defended him, sacrificed meals so he could buy new strings, patched his torn clothes with loving hands, and kissed his forehead each night after his long hours singing in markets, reminding him that music could carry him further than money ever would. So when the news spread that a world-renowned televised talent competition was holding auditions downtown, Mateo felt both fear and hope collide in his chest, fear because dreams had always been too costly for him, hope because this might be the chance to honor his father and prove his mother right, and with coins saved from shining shoes at the marketplace, he registered, skipping meals for days to afford the jeepney fare, and walked the rest of the way in the blazing sun to stand among hundreds of contestants dressed in clean clothes and polished shoes, holding instruments that shone under the lights while his guitar looked like firewood compared to theirs, and their eyes followed him with judgment, some smirking, others laughing, one whispering. He must have wandered in from the streets, as even the security guards nearly pushed him away until he showed them his crumpled registration slip, begging with desperation until, reluctantly, they placed him last on the audition list, as though his presence was a nuisance rather than a possibility. And so he sat in a corner for hours, clutching his guitar, listening to contestants rehearse scales and polish their harmonies, while whispers of doubt gnawed at him, but he closed his eyes and remembered his father's rough hands guiding his small fingers on the strings, remembered the warmth of his mother's voice telling him to sing from his soul, and whispered a prayer that if this were the only chance he ever got, he would give every ounce of himself to that song. When his name was finally called, 3 judges sat waiting on stage, famous for their sharp tongues and unforgiving critiques, one raising an eyebrow at his torn shorts and bare feet, another shifting impatiently as if to say, "This will be quick," while the audience chuckled softly at the sight of the poor boy and his broken guitar, but Mateo, trembling yet resolute, walked to the center, adjusted the strap, and strummed the opening chords of Hotel California. And as the first notes echoed, the room fell into a hush. Because his voice, though untrained, carried a haunting, raw beauty, trembling yet powerful, filled not just with sound but with the weight of hunger, grief, and love, each lyric pouring out as though pulled from the deepest corners of his soul. And suddenly the mocking smirks faded, replaced by wide eyes and stillness, as if everyone present had forgotten to breathe, because Mateo was not just singing, he was reliving every night of loss, every memory of his father's voice, every sacrifice his mother made, and weaving them into each word until by the time he reached the chorus, one of the judges, a stern woman known for never showing emotion, pressed her hand to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes, whispering, "This is real," while another, usually sarcastic, leaned forward with trembling lips, unable to hide the lump in his throat, and when the final haunting chord faded into silence, there was a pause so deep it felt holy before the audience erupted into thunderous applause. People leaping to their feet, clapping, cheering, some wiping away tears, the judges themselves rising in ovation, one declaring through tears, "This is why music exists, to remind us of our shared humanity," while another said, "I've heard thousands of voices, but never one that reached this deep," and Mateo, overwhelmed by the roar of applause he had never known in his life, clutched his guitar as if it were his father's hand, bowing humbly because for a boy who had sung for coins on street corners, to be celebrated like this was beyond every dream. Days later, when the episode aired, millions across the Philippines, the United States, and around the world watched his performance online, sharing clips that went viral overnight, comments flooding in from strangers across continents. "I've never cried like this from a song, he sings with a soul beyond his years, this boy is every struggle turned into hope," and donations poured in through accounts the show set up, enough to buy Mateo and his mother not just food and clothes but a safe home, a miracle after years of living under a leaking roof where rain was a constant intruder. But even more life-changing was the moment one of the judges, a famous producer, reached out personally, not with flashy contracts but with sincerity, offering mentorship, formal lessons, and guidance, telling him, "Talent like yours deserves wings, not chains," and though Mateo hesitated, afraid of leaving the only world he knew, his mother told him through tears, "This is your father's song carrying you forward, don't stop now," and with her blessing, he stepped into a new life, learning music, traveling, performing, yet never forgetting who he was or where he came from, always carrying that old guitar, restored but never replaced. Because it was more than wood and strings, it was memory, love, and the bridge to his father's voice. Years later, returning to the same talent show stage as a celebrated artist, he strummed the familiar chords of Hotel California once more, his voice now stronger yet still filled with the raw heart that made him unique, dedicating it to every child who has been told their dreams are too far away. "Believe me, you are closer than you think," and as the audience erupted in tears and cheers, his mother, seated in the front row, wept openly, whispering gratitude to God and to her late husband, knowing his dream had lived on through their son, and the world saw in Mateo's journey not just the rise of a singer but the triumph of resilience, compassion, and humanity, proof that kindness from strangers, sacrifice from a mother, and courage from a boy could turn poverty into inspiration, sorrow into beauty, and a forgotten voice into an anthem that touched millions across oceans, reminding us all that greatness can be born from the humblest places, that sometimes the smallest voices move the biggest hearts, and that music, when sung with truth, does not just entertain, it heals, unites, and proves that no dream is ever too far away for those who dare to believe.